a moment right here would change the format of Amazing Race for a few seasons.
The best choice for all of us is to suspend the race.
What's up, everybody? This is Willie, and today I'm returning to talking about Amazing Race again. And this time I want to make this video to reflect on the stretch of Amazing Race seasons that had a radically different format that had to meet a certain constraint, and those were the COVID seasons, which you may know started from Amazing Race 33 and moved forward onto Amazing Race 34 and 36, which was actually filmed as the 35th season but aired as 36. So what I'm doing here is analyzing the big change in the format of Amazing Race that happened with these seasons, and talk about what I think of them and how impactful the change were to the seasons and how I perceived them. And on top of that, I'll also do a quick ranking of these three seasons to make more of a comparison between these somewhat congruent seasons. So let's jump straight into the story. So all of us pretty much know that it all started from 33, which was not initially supposed to happen, considering 33 was half a quarter into filming with its intended regular format, but COVID disrupted its filming process and it had to be suspended. So then, 19 months later, production concepted a new filming constraint so that they can complete the filming production of the season and also maintain the safety of the crew and the teams. And in doing so, they introduced a radically different format that I'll run through each important element one by one to emphasize on the format changes. So the first and most notorious change is the fact that we weren't going to have teams book their own flights now, because due to some travel constraints, the show would distribute chartered flights, meaning they rented their own private jet to fly the teams to the next countries. And I will say, although for the circumstances, it's right to do so for the safety of the teams, it is also really lame for TV-wise, considering it eliminates the airport drama that Amazing Race fans really enjoy seeing when teams are trying to scramble to catch the earliest flight they can to the next destination. And so this feature completely eliminates that, and it takes away some of that fun, which in doing so does harm some of the gravitas for these Amazing Race seasons, since we're not going to be providing much flight drama as we're in the traveling phase of the legs. Like, to reiterate, I get that it's done to maintain safe protocols, but the double-edged sword here is the fact that it deprives us from airport drama and essentially giving teams a more bare-bones travel journey, as it is now in production's control to take them from place to place instead of them getting there on their own by booking their own flights. So yeah, this element to the format was very fluff in terms of the entertainment that it was going to give, which was absolutely blank, and I do think is one of the biggest harm to some of the enjoyments from these Amazing Race seasons. So the next element I want to talk about is that majority of the legs will be self-driving, since we have to meet with the COVID constraints, and this one I'm kind of okay with, because we do get to see some drama with teams either navigating themselves the wrong way, getting lost, and going completely off course, which can add some level of comedy. However, with this element being done quite frequently, it can get really repetitive, and that's kind of harming factors with this aspect. And yeah, I did just mention that most of the legs will have self-drive, because some will involve taxi, which thank God, but it also wasn't as fun as they were. So really, this part isn't the most egregious, but still had some flaws that weren't really tweaked enough to maintain the enjoyment with some of the seasons. And then to the last element I want to highlight is the aspect of there being no in-game twists, like the U-turn, which that itself was definitely the most lamest part of this format change, because it took away any sort of team agency that would, one, eliminating any sort of drama or conflict between some teams, and two, depriving the chances of these legs being non-linear, which can lead to some very predictable results. And for insight, when you compare it to something like any other regular seasons of The Amazing Race, they would have some sort of twist element like a U-turn or a yield, something that could help shift some of the placements around to avoid having a predictable outcome, rendering these legs to be more fluid and flexible. While for the COVID seasons, with the lack of twists, the legs just play out in such a linear fashion that makes things just come off very lackluster. And no, I'm not going to say the format completely eliminated twists, because there were some twists added, like notably the scramble, which is a cool concept that I do like, but it didn't seem as groundbreaking for the game. And secondly, the feature of no non-elimination legs that was featured in Amazing Race 34, which was actually a good idea, so that way it added more urgency with these legs, knowing in advance that non-elimination was all voided. But even then, these twists didn't really add much to the scale of giving agency to the teams, so yeah. Okay, this is actually a last second addition, since I somewhat forgot to acknowledge this element in the initial recording, but in the COVID seasons, they would also feature group departures instead of the usual individual team departures at the pit start. And for my opinions on it, it's just whatever. Just kind of feeling out of touch with the traditional Amazing Race, that's all. And this element is also sometimes corresponding to the ramifications for a team that gets saved from a non-elimination leg, which obviously is only seen in 33, where the team that comes in last will depart in their own individual group a chunk of minutes after the previous group's departure. Pretty tame, not much to it. So all that pretty much elaborated on, I can now get to the final phase of this video being the ranking. So this ranking is on the COVID seasons based on how much enjoyment I had with them in relation to the cast, the route, and the competition. So let's begin ranking the season at the bottom. And seriously, it's obviously going to be Amazing Race 36. Why? Because the competition was dreadful with Ricky and Cesar dominating. Furthermore, the route was just so baseline because it was in favor of them too, because it all took place in Latin America. And then I can say the cast is just fine, not really the biggest standout. Aside from the winners, Rod and Letitia, Danny and Angie, and I'll say for sure Amber and Vinny, that's pretty much it. This season, like I mentioned before, is a slog. Not having much merit to elevate it. So yeah, now for rank number 2, it's Amazing Race 34, which I can say is a slightly better season, but also still has some tame competition. Not overtly dominated like Ricky and Cesar's season, but still, not really much stakes to it. The route was just alright, much more diverse than the season I just talked about, and this is a very well-liked cast, but I feel like on par with Survivor 44, which is noted for its very kind-hearted cast. I feel like this cast is just way too excessive with that, to the point where there's lackluster drama, so things can play out a bit more tedious. I mean, the boot order did go the way I wanted it to, with my top 2 favorites being the top 2 of the season, but I feel like the way the season played out just wasn't in a more epic way, so that's why I would have this ranked at number 2. So pretty much rank at number 1 is Amazing Race 33, which then again, the season alone, ranking amongst these 3, it is the best, but if you compare it with every other season of the Amazing Race, yeah, it's definitely not as high and does not reach much of the peak of good Amazing Race seasons, but this one is definitely one that is very special because of how it was the catalyst for the format changes that was catered towards the COVID restrictions. And for me personally, there's a lot more enjoyment because of how much uniqueness there was to this season. On top of the competition being kind of fluid, the cast is pretty well liked, and there is somewhat more in-team drama involved, more so than what I could say for 34. And yeah, the route is pretty dull, but it's only for the circumstances, which I can give it a fair slide to. So yeah, this season is pretty much the best, and I will note at the fact that based on this ranking, it's essentially me going backwards with these seasons, which goes to show as we continued on, it just continued regressing to where the enjoyment level dwindled down. And I'm thankful that Amazing Race did not remain with this format, because then I would think the seasons would even be more lackluster than it already is. So it's good enough for 3 seasons to be known as the COVID seasons, and that's fine by me. That wraps up everything of what I've got to touch upon with my reflection on the COVID seasons of The Amazing Race. And as I run through each important element that factored into their format change, it definitely shows how much it sort of detrimented the pacing with these seasons, where there wasn't much gravitas to them that made them as challenging or enjoyable to really reach the peak of a good Amazing Race season. And now looking back at it, I'm really blessed that 35 and 37 returned back to the regular format, where they are solid seasons. Even though I never finished 35, I can tell it was pretty good too. So anyways, that's all I got to cover today, and I appreciate every one of you tuning in for this short Amazing Race video I wanted to make. Thanks, and I'll see you all in another video.